All right, we now join Dr. Marek Laskiewicz to discuss these issues. Marek, glad to have you join us. I gather the wind has surged again, intensifying the fire and making it harder to contain, as it were. Give us a sense of the damage, the number of people dead, properties destroyed.
Well, there's some reports, of course, over 20 people are dead. And in terms of properties destroyed, there are some estimates that are putting it as high as $150 billion. So there is, from that point of view, it is actually enormous in terms of finances, actually far bigger than the aid going to Ukraine. Moreover, of course, there's the threat of even more coming. And of course, we do have the tens of thousands of properties destroyed as well.
All right. Do you envisage more such fires in future? And the case of LA?
Well, the key point, I think, here is that there are several problems, one of which is containment. And it would be, I think, much better for the federal department to help, in particular using the armed forces to speed up the containment. This is not a water issue. This is simply a physical barrier in the sense there's nothing for the fire to get hold of for some distance. And this could be done, I think, relatively quickly if you have the resources. And this is the story of the fire from start to finish. They seem to lack resources, which is a pity, because in that way, the actual extent of the damage could have been limited, even if the fire would have been broken out and been possible to put out for some time.
Talk to us about recovery and containment work, Marek.
Yes, what is another aspect of this stress is that the recovery aspect is simply waiting and waiting until the weather conditions improve. But in point of fact, some of the areas could already been repopulated. It has been said by the fire chief that, of course, there are downed power lines, which is quite true. But the point is that these could be, in effect, switched off or made safe, and people could go back and start rebuilding their lives and their property. Overall, the authorities are, I think, being slightly dilatory in this respect too, in the sense that if people are able to go back to their houses, there could be items saved, which of course won't be saved if they're left out in the open for long enough. And also, apart from that, they have an opportunity to start to rebuild their lives because they are literally homeless. But they have property, and there's probably a place they could, in some cases, stay or at least move in somehow with a trailer or a tent. And the point here is that there is, again, an absence of urgency, I think, in this respect too.
Why do you think that is so? You talked about the absence of urgency on the part of government. Why?
No, I think the reason is that they're taking it as it were, as an emergency which is taking them to their limits. And instead, they should have been brought in extra resources from the word go, which is, of course, the federal way of doing things in the sense of perhaps sending in the armed forces for the containment of the fire. As quickly as possible, of course, to get the people so they could at least go back to their houses. That is to say, the evacuation order should be lifted as soon as possible. There is, of course, the aspect of the ground being hot, but that can also be dealt with. These aren't water issues, because the water issue is entirely separate. It's as part of, undoubtedly, a study afterwards, but it would appear to be quite clear the case that in future, the entire reservoir can't be taken down for repairs. It should be bisected or dissected, so there's some water is in reserve. As things stand, for yet another 2 days, people will be homeless. The containment policy should, I think, we hope, be speeded up. Otherwise, the fire may spread further, much further.
Marek, different strokes for different folks. Some of the films I watched, there was this lady who was talking about the fact that she's lost all she has. She's teaching people how to save life, but she couldn't save her home. And then there was another of a lady who said, all right, it's insured. I'm going to rebuild. But then I keep thinking about what next, supposing this happens next. So give us a sense of the people's feeling and what government is doing to assuage their loss, the impact mentally, psychologically, and otherwise?
Well, this is a further fact. Unfortunately, neither the president-elect nor the president has, of course, come down for any periods to, as you put it quite rightly, assuage the people, because that should have been done as well. In effect, the people have been left to their own devices, but worse than that, they're not even allowed back to their own homes. People have lost, but even those who have lost, it should be remembered exactly in the lines you're saying, different strokes for different folks. There are some people who could start rebuilding more or less straight away in the sense that they know what they're doing. Others could already be dealing with their insurance claims. And therefore, every day for someone who is homeless, who has lost their home in these circumstances counts. Hence, in my opinion, the best way of assuaging people would be to, as quickly as possible, allow them to get back and to start rebuilding their lives and ideally their homes too.
But they can't get back if the firefighters are still grappling with the surging winds and trying to put out the fire. What is the financial environmental impact?
No,
Yeah, go on, go on.
one moment. Yeah, one moment. That's not quite true, because you're treating the entire area as just one huge fire. In areas, some areas, the fire's been. There is no more fire. It's those areas I'm referring to. Obviously, if an area is still burning, no one can go back there. But the point about it is, as seen from your pictures now, aside from the fact the ground may be very hot in some areas have had their fire. It is now time to think in terms of recovery. But it's been made quite clear that until Wednesday, or after Wednesday to be exact, nothing like that's going to happen. And this is the point I mean about dilatoriness. And also the containment policy, again, is another aspect that has to do with water. As for the financial aspect, it is very serious. Losses which may, in fact, still mount, please note, mean that America may well have to reconsider its policy of supplying aid to Ukraine, which in any case, President Trump was quite clearly had mixed feelings about, to put it euphemistically. And therefore, it follows that a disaster of this sort, especially if it carries on, because that's what we're really talking about on Wednesday, if the containment policy isn't finished, it means that there may well be a problem supplying aid for Ukraine. USA is not a bottomless pit of money. It has a huge debt. And this, when it's one of the most important cities, is a huge financial loss.
Okay, wildfire crisis, I'm hearing Saki is blaming Trump misinformation for this crisis. What do you make of that? And what plans are there going forward for this kind of events, as it were, nature, not caused by anyone, as it were? Yeah, go on.
Well, this is just the very key point, because the key other aspect of this fire is, of course, what about the future, including LA, because it could get a fire again of this sort. The point here is about how dealing with the reservoirs so that they always have some water in them. The point here is dealing how you get huge resources, ideally federal resources, on the spot very quickly to try and contain fires like this, which are quite clearly beyond the scale of any local city, including a city as wealthy and as big as LA, to cope with. These are the issues that have to be addressed, and I think substantially quickly, because there's no obvious reason why the fire couldn't break out in other places in California, or for that matter, in any other hot country. Therefore, this is not only of local importance to LA, the study, but to the whole world. Because if the climate is going up in terms of temperature, and we now know it's exceeded 1.5 degrees Celsius this year for the first time, this means the climate is getting hotter, and therefore it is essential for the whole world to take on board the idea that there may be a wildfire in the middle of a town and how to prepare for it.
Now, while you were talking, this thought suddenly came to me. I mean, I remember We Are the World. It was put together. I mean, the song was written by, of course, late Jackson and Lionel Richie for funds, for disadvantaged areas. Is there anything in the works? I mean, Hollywood stars, their houses were destroyed, their properties destroyed. Is there anything like that in the works, or is it too early, for people to raise funds, for people who've lost belongings, properties, and all that?
Well, to be quite honest, the fundraising has to be done officially. And so in that sense, there should be an organization. One would suppose that one way of going about it would be to have, so to speak, a fire tsar, someone in charge of not only coping with the fire, but coping with the recovery, and the funds could then be dealt with in an official way. But it's quite clear no one's thinking particularly in terms of recovery, let alone funds. But as you rightly say, they will be needed. But there is again the problem. The USA has a huge debt. To find extra funds on this sort of scale is not an easy task. So there may well be some sort of international appeal, but that is almost unheard of in USA. And therefore the answer is, I don't think they're considering funds from any sources other than possibly the Washington at all.
Our hearts really go out to all those who have lost their lives and properties. Quite a tragedy. Thank you so much, Dr. Marek Laskiewicz, for your time.